Introducing Punchbowl News. From Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, and John Bresnahan. News about the people who matter, for the people who matter. Join the community at punchbowl.news.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Love having a packed house with Congress back in session. There is no shortage of things for us to discuss this morning. Really excited for our second event as part of our series called 5G's Climate Impact. Today's conversation will focus on 5G's impact on transportation. A big thank you to CTIA for making this conversation possible. We are going to be joined this morning by Representative Buddy Carter, a Republican from Georgia who is also a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Afterward, Joe Moy, CEO of Beep, also a Georgia company, and Nick Ludlum, SVP and Chief Communications Officer of CTIA, will join us for a fireside chat. And just a reminder, after all of that, if you haven't had enough, you can stick around for our brown bag lunch, our first live in person, or as Jake called it this morning on our podcast, the brown bag breakfast, where I'm going to bring up all of the founders and Heather Cagle. We're going to talk about what to expect in September, October, and post the election. So there is no shortage of things to discuss. Just a reminder, you can follow Punchbowl News on all social media, and if you want to tweet about this event, we'd love you to, at Punchbowl News. And with that, let's get started with the editorial portion of the conversation. I'd love to welcome Mr. Carter to the stage. Congressman Carter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to kick off this conversation as we do with all Punchbowl News events with a few news of the day questions because it's Washington and there's no shortage of things happening here. But I want to talk first about some of the biggest news over the August break. Former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago was raided by the FBI. Papers that were secret, that had nuclear secrets in them, were found, as the Washington Post has reported. There's been a ton of coverage of this. A lot of defense by Republicans of the former president. I just want to get your take. Do you think there should be any consequences for the former president having documents like that at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, first of all, we're in uncharted waters here. I mean, let's face it, we've never seen anything like this happen before. So we've got to be very careful in how we approach this. Regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, these are uncharted waters that really do deserve as much delicate attention, if you will, as we can get. Look, no one's above the law. We all agree with that, and certainly we want to make sure that that is followed. Now, you know, whether the right procedures were followed or not, you know, the documents that were supposedly found have no reason to believe that they aren't telling the truth. But at the same time, we just need to be very, very careful when we talk about, regardless, again, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, when we're talking about a former president and talking about a raid of their home, this is serious.
Absolutely. I just want to follow up quickly on that because I think one of the bigger concerns that has been raised is just, you know, Republican or Democrat, the fact that these documents weren't kept in the way that they were supposed to. Are you concerned at all about that information having gotten into the wrong hands?
Well, you have to be. There's no question about that. Obviously, that's why we have classified documents. That's why we go through this process. And certainly, and again, I don't know the specifics of it. I don't know whether, you know, this was just in a rush that they were trying to get out of there. Let's keep in mind now, this former president didn't think he was going to be leaving. And I'm sure it was just a mad rush to pack things up. I'm not making excuses. Again, no one is above the law. But at the same time, we got to put all this into context.
All right, we are going to shift gears fairly dramatically to the midterms and the election season that we are in, roughly 60 days or so from the midterm election. Your home state, Georgia, is definitely ground zero for a lot of campaigning right now. A lot of polls showing Republicans not in as strong of position as, you know, kind of a few months ago. Even Kevin McCarthy, I think, previously said maybe even 50 seats the House Republicans could pick up. What is your sense about where House Republicans are in terms of taking the majority? And, you know, how disappointing would it be if that doesn't happen?
Well, certainly it's going to be disappointing if it doesn't happen, but I do feel like it's still going to happen, and I feel like it's going to happen in a big kind of way. I don't know about 50 seats, but we all know that generally in a midterm election, that the party that is not in power in the White House picks up, 27 seats, and then with the president with the approval rating as low as this president has, it bumps up to 37 seats. You know, I'm looking probably around 25 to 30, I would suspect. We expected the ebb and flow, if you will, of the election season, and we kind of knew this was going to happen. Listen, Tom Emmer and Kevin McCarthy are always reminding us we ain't won anything yet. We've still got to get out and do the work, and we're still working hard, and we're going to continue to do that. But look, I've been in the district for the last month, and I work hard, and I'm out there among the people, and I will tell you, they're concerned. They're concerned about the direction of this country. They're concerned about inflation. They're concerned about crime. They're concerned about the southern border. They're concerned about the world affairs and what's going on and the United States' role as a leader in democracy. They are concerned about those things, and it really is kitchen table issues. And all these this other noise that you hear out there, you know, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about how am I going to afford gas? How am I, the farmers, we got a big ag presence in my district, a big forestry presence. Had an ag roundtable just 2 days ago, and they were telling me, you know, look, if you think groceries are expensive now, wait until the next cycle. It's really the next cycle that you're going to see the increase in prices with groceries, because they're having to pay for the fertilizer and the diesel fuel, and all of the costs that are involved now are going to be passed along in the next go-round.
So certainly a lot of Washington noise has been your colleagues in the Senate in terms of Republicans being very nervous about not being able to win some of the seats that they expected to. Herschel Walker, what's your take? A lot of people saying he's been a pretty disappointing candidate.
Well, first of all, you know, Herschel fell from 81% to 69% in the primary. I would love to fall to 69%, no question about that. You know, he kind of stayed in the basement during the primary. We knew that he was probably going to stumble out of the block a little bit, and he did, but he is picking it up now. And I'm still confident that Herschel is going to win, and I'm confident that the Republicans are going to win in the state of Georgia. You know, I think probably I heard it best from a constituent who said, look, Raphael Warnock's got a silver tongue, but Herschel Walker's got a heart of gold. And he does. I don't know how many of y'all know Herschel or have gotten to know him. He is legitimate. And I'm looking forward to him representing the state of Georgia in the United States Senate, and I think he will be.
All right, well, time will tell. Let's shift the conversation to the topic of the day, 5G and transportation. You are a member of the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. Was telling you earlier that I was looking back at some of the committee hearings this past year on this topic. Large jurisdiction over this area. Can you talk, like 30,000 feet, 5G, what its implementation will mean for innovation in this country?
Well, you know, I think we're on the cusp of a new generation of innovation. I have always said, and I continue to say, that the greatest innovators, the greatest scientists are right here in the United States of America. And I believe that. And if you look throughout history at innovation, you'll see that much of it, especially here recently in the last century or a couple of centuries, has come right here in the United States. So I'm excited about what's going to be done, particularly with 5G, and particularly in the rural areas. Now, keep in mind, I represent South Georgia. You know, I have the entire coast of Georgia. I have a lot of rural area. And there are two Georgias. There's Atlanta and everywhere else. And I represent everywhere else. And it's very exciting to think about what's going to happen in the way of autonomous vehicles. Now, as many of you know, I'm a pharmacist by profession, so a healthcare professional. I'm excited to know and to think of what's going to happen in healthcare. You know, already what we've seen happen during this pandemic with telehealth. I mean, it's amazing, you know. I can remember in the committee, in the health subcommittee, of us talking about, you watch, telehealth in the next couple of decades is really going to take off. Well, during the pandemic, it became an integral part of our healthcare system. And that's where we're really going to see, I think, a lot of the innovation, a lot of the great discoveries that are going to take place.
there was a lot of money put toward 5G in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. This wasn't legislation you supported, but now that it's law, can you talk a little bit about what the role of Congress is going forward when it comes to doling out those funds, when it comes to oversight to make sure that those funds, when it comes to 5G, are appropriated correctly?
Yes, and that is important, because keep in mind that the role of Congress is oversight. That is one of our primary, if not our primary role, that in obviously finances and appropriations. So oversight is going to be extremely important, making certain that the monies that are being spent, that the agencies are working together, that they're coordinating, they're cooperating, and that's so vitally important. That's one thing that I was really disappointed, and one of the reasons why I didn't support the legislation is because I didn't think there was enough oversight in it, and I didn't think that there were enough safeguards to make sure that we weren't going to have each different agency, if you will, out there doing their own thing. That's why it's extremely important for Congress to step up to the plate and to do our part in the way of oversight, in the way of coordination, making sure that these monies are going. There's a lot of money. A lot of federal dollars being spent. Now, we certainly appreciate the private sector, and we can't just dismiss their role here and their investment. You know, they've invested over $60 billion into this already, and will invest even more. So kudos to the private sector, but at the same time, as far as the government funds are concerned, the role of Congress has got to be an oversight role, and that is one of our primary objectives in the Republican conference right now of what we want to do next session.
Talk about, so obviously this whole series is focused on the climate impact of 5G, right? And the fact that it could have massive impact. What are you hearing in your own home state? Are you, do you think that there's an opportunity there when it comes to transportation, when it comes to the future of energy?
I do. I think there are a lot of opportunities. Again, I'm excited, and you know, I'm not going to profile here, but I know a lot of people probably think South Georgia, oh, those Hicks, what do they think? Well, let me tell you what those Hicks think. They're excited too, and they're very excited about because look, nobody loves the environment as much as we do in South Georgia. We love the outdoors. We love hunting. We love fishing. We love our environment, and we want to make sure that our environment is taken care of. So we're excited about, decreasing emissions through innovation, through more autonomous vehicles, through, it's actually going to lead to less travel. That will be important too. So, and the increase in manufacturing. And the speed of manufacturing, all of that is certainly exciting, and certainly what we're looking forward to in South Georgia as well.
I often ask in these kinds of conversations, so we look back, kind of what Congress has done, what's happening now in terms of innovation, but project forward, right? In 5 to 10 years, can you talk about what you see the role of Congress in helping make sure that this kind of what you just talked about, this vision of what could happen in South Georgia actually happens? Is there more legislation needed? Is there more, investment with the private sector, or what do you think could actually be done or needs to be done to kind of make sure that this actually happens?
Well, you could stop me, you're probably going to have to stop me because I could go on and on. I think it's important when you say look ahead to the next 5 or 10 years, let's look back a little bit to the last 5 to 10 years first. And what we see, I'm very concerned, and many of my colleagues in our conference are very concerned that we in the legislative branch have deferred too much authority to the executive branch over a period of time, both Republicans and Democrats. And we need to take that back, particularly in the way of oversight, particularly in the way of appropriations and of funding and of budgeting. We need to take that power back into the legislative branch, and Congress needs to reassert ourselves. Everybody wanted to do away, and they did do away with the earmarks. Well, we got directed congressional spending now. We don't have earmarks. We have directed congressional spending. But, when you think about it, and I get it, I know about the bridge to nowhere and all this other stuff, and I know it was abused, and I understand all that. However, who knows more about the projects in the 1st Congressional District of Georgia than I do? Who up here in Washington, D.C.? I'm the one, and whoever the representative is, they know what is needed in their district. So, yeah, we need to make sure that we don't let it get to the point that it was before, where they were being abused and there was a lot of waste there. But we do need to reassert ourselves. Now, looking ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, The role of Congress is going to be legislation. It's definitely going to be oversight. We have got to take the bull by the horns, and we have got to do our part in making sure that these agencies are spending these funds in a way that is smart, in a way that is, and I use the word conservative.
All right, I want to ask one question because you seem very pro, almost earmarks. You ready to? Where are your colleagues on this, and should we expect a change going forward?
They are congressional directed spending.
Right. Sorry, excuse me. I mean, how are congressional directed spending? How's that? Do you think that's going to come back in a big way?
They are back, and not in a big way, but they are back to a certain extent. And again, you know, we got to be careful not to let it get to the point that it was before. I understand that, but again, I just, you know, what did we do when we did away with earmarks? We essentially said, okay, the legislative branch is going to defer to the executive branch. Now somebody in the White House is making decisions on the projects that are going to be funded in my district. Well, you know, with all due respect to those people in the executive branch and in the White House, you know, I'm the one who's in the district. I'm the one who's lived there all my life and intend to live there the rest of my life. And I know those projects. So
there you go. We heard it first. Congressman, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. All right. Take it. All right. And now I want to welcome Joe Moy, CEO of Beep, and Nick Ludlam, SVP and Chief Communications Officer of CTIA, for a fireside chat. Come on up, guys. All right. Well, Joe, we're going to go with you first since you're coming all the way from Georgia.
Exactly. I came all the way up here.
I want to let's just set the conversation a little bit at the table here. For anybody here who doesn't know, what is Beep? What's the mission? Talk a little bit kind of what you're doing down in Georgia.
Yeah, so Beep is a company that focuses very squarely on deploying autonomous electric shuttles in multi-passenger, you know, public transit use cases, so serving what's called the first mile, last mile scenarios, arterial routes in downtown urban cores, campus type scenarios, really proving out the technology in more controlled environments and really delivering meaningful mobility use cases.
So dig a little bit deeper there. 5G, what is the impact of it for a company like yours?
Yeah, so 5G has some incredible implications in, you know, the adoption and further expansion of the use of autonomous platforms. And I'll give you a couple of examples of work that we're doing, one in Peachtree Corners, Georgia, another in a community down in Florida, but partnering to provide the interfaces with smart infrastructure. If you think about autonomous technologies, and regardless of what you read, and I won't argue or point anybody out, but the reality of cars driving all around our roadways, you know, without drivers in them, 10, 15 years away, maybe never. The technology is going to be proven out, kind of walk before you run, if you will. But what's going to be critical, if you think about it, the platforms, the vehicles have to interface with infrastructure like a human would. How do you look at a stop sign or a stop light and know that, you know, it's a stale yellow getting ready to turn red, or it's green and it's okay to proceed? And if you think about the importance of communicating in real-time mode with the infrastructure, that's absolutely critical to the safety and effectiveness of these types of vehicles. The other thing I'd point out, Anna, which is really, people may not understand, but I think it's really important because it relates to what we're doing with 5G, both from the standpoint of low latency as well as security, and that is the ability to interface with the vehicles remotely. Technology is not perfect. Something happens. You read all the time about a vehicle stopped in the middle of the roadway. What do? Do you dispatch a team, or do you tap into the vehicle remotely and provide some, you know, remote assistance, troubleshooting, those types of communications, and ultimately maybe authorize the vehicle to make a maneuver? Well, if you're looking at a roadway remotely and you're authorizing it to maneuver around an obstacle or a traffic issue, you've got to have real-time sight of what you're looking at. So I think the ability to support these vehicles in the remote command and control, which is a reality of how they're going to evolve, is probably the most important use case that we're testing now.
Super interesting. Nick, I'm going to go to you. This is our second in a three-part series. The first focusing on 5G's climate impact and manufacturing. Today's conversation around transportation. Can you talk a little bit about what the broader goals are when it comes to climate, transportation, kind of not just in Georgia, but across the country?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so glad Joe is here today, because it's just further evidence that 5G is here. We're starting to see these 5G use cases, and there's still a road to development, but it's real. And we're seeing 5G's impact across all different sectors of the economy. And one of the reasons we're here, what we're really excited about is it has this really interesting impact on climate and on climate change. And so Accenture did a report recently which showed that across industries, including transportation, 5G will help the U.S. meet 20% of its climate goals in the next couple of years. And then in transportation specifically, which contributes about 30% of our emissions in this country, 5G will enable use cases like BEEP and others, which collectively will have the impact of planting about 100 million acres of new forest, which will have a significant climate role as well. So it's a really exciting time, and there's some really huge impacts that we're starting to see.
I want to go to you, Joe, in terms of, you kind of talked about the use cases and the specific, but I think all of us read stories about what's happening with autonomous vehicles and, what the future is. Is it the Jetsons? Is it not? How are you differentiating yourself in this marketplace, which is there's kind of growing competitive nature?
Yeah, I think there's two key areas that we differentiate ourselves in. One is the use cases themselves, or more controlled speed, geofenced environment. So we work on specific routes. We're not an any-to-any service delivery. We don't go to your driveway and take you anywhere you want to go. We've got specific routes that provide a very advanced mobility network in these communities, so very convenient to access them from a retail area to get out to a residential area, or to a mass transit stop, a bus station, to access health services in a downtown community. So the first thing is the use case itself is very specific to, again, these first mile, last mile scenarios. The second thing that's critical is the form factor itself. We focus on multi-passenger shuttles, 12 to 14 passenger microtransit solutions. And if you think about shared mobility and you think about the environmental impact of people using this as an alternative means of transportation, you're leaving 4.5 cars home for every route that we service. It's not a one-to-one displacement of a single vehicle. And that form factor is critical to us, because if we're going to really transform mobility as we know it, we need to have a convenient, safe alternative to our personal vehicles. And that's really the problem that we're solving for.
Nick, maybe you can take it, kind of on the broader, from B plus other autonomous vehicles and 5G. I mean, how does this impact the communities more broadly? That has to be something you're pretty excited about.
Yeah, well, I think so. So BEEP is a really interesting example of what you might see in a community as sort of 5G impacts transit. Because it's about the autonomous vehicle, but you can also envision 5G literally in the asphalt, in the traffic lights, in the command systems and so on, which all work together to not just take cars off the road as BEEP does, but also to make more efficient transit patterns and things like that, right? So people aren't sitting and idling in cars with all the emissions, but they're actually point to point. They're not they're stuck in traffic and so on. So just in transit and in transportation, we're seeing lots of these little different impacts which add up to a really, really big impact. And then you look at other industries like agriculture and healthcare and education and so on, where 5G is removing or creating efficiencies that further reduce emissions and improve outcomes.
All right, I want to end on a kind of a similar conversation to how I ended with the congressman, but I always like to look forward in these conversations. I'll go to you first, Nick. What's the impact on infrastructure and transportation when it comes to 5G in the next 5 to 10 years? Are you looking for more, for Washington to do more?
Well, so The wireless industry is unfortunate that we have tremendous bipartisan support. Everybody wants better wireless. Everybody wants better 5G networks. Of course, we're always looking for more spectrum, for the FCC to auction more spectrum to enable those wireless networks, and that's something that's certainly being discussed in Washington right now, and we're confident we will get that. More spectrum means better networks, and better networks means bigger innovations, right? So it's a big part of what we all want and what I think we'll see in the coming years.
All right, Joe, tell us, you're coming from Georgia to Washington, doing a bunch of meetings this week. What does BEEP need, or what do you expect to happen in the next 5 to 10 years in your industry?
Yeah, I'll say in our industry, and I mean, certainly echo the comments here. I would add that, you know, regulatory change on the transportation side of things is absolutely critical. You know, our code is 40 years old, doesn't take into account the innovations and the technology behind autonomy. And there's a lot of great work going on at Department of Transportation and NHTSA in particular to evolve our code, and most specifically the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. But I'll also, you know, as I kind of look forward 5 to 10 years, I think setting a realistic expectation for these technologies. They are coming. They're coming, I think, a lot more slow and deliberate than people originally projected, and that's just because of the reality. If you think about the technology of going out in high-speed use cases, it's no different than a human. If you're barreling down a residential road at 80 miles an hour, what can you really pick up as a human? Same thing holds for technology. So we've got to be real about the types of use cases, safety being first, obviously extending mobility, solving for the environmental challenges out there with driven vehicles, but we've got to do that in a crawl before you walk, walk before you run type mentality, and that's really, you know, I think how we've been successful to date and plan to be in deploying these technologies much more broadly.
All right, Joe, Nick, thank you so much for joining me this morning. We really appreciate it. A big thank you to Congressman Carter as well for spending time with us during the congressional recess this morning, and to CTIA for making this conversation possible. We'll be back with the third part of this series later this year, so stay tuned for that. Just a quick update, we also have 2 other events this month. We'll be talking with Congresswoman Kathy McMorris-Rodgers next week, and we also have Senator John Thune before the end of the month. You can go to punchbowl.news and our events hub and sign up to attend all of that.